What's going on, Clarence? Cornmeal. Let's do it. D-man alright. Whoa. D-man alright. Spicy mafia. Spicy mafia. You gotta keep it spicy. If you see a queen, you better wife it. While we lit her, then a lighter. It makes things much brighter.
All right, so this is indeed an honor. I have the great Michael del Castillo of Forbes. He is the enterprise blockchain and crypto, or one of them anyway, out at Forbes, and his column is mandatory reading. We're here to discuss what he calls the crypto's Valachi Papers. We'll get into all that, but before we do, Michael, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm excited about your perspective on the industry, and when you reached out, it was a no-brainer for me to accept. So thanks for the close read and for the opportunity.
Yeah, man, it's one of those pieces where, well, first off, again, I'm an admirer and love reading your stuff generally, but this one in particular hit me because the implications are so profound. For the future of cryptocurrency, and there's so much information in there that I think our natural, because CoinSpice is again on the sort of the cryptocurrency aspect of it. We're kind of natural conspiratorialists, so everything kind of revolves around tin hats, and we always see cabals everywhere. And there's I wouldn't say, I'll just say it. There's kind of an anti-government tinge to the way that we look at the world. And so here in your wonderful piece, it all kind of comes together. And again, I'm getting way over my skis.
It could be messy, and yes. I've been in the Bitcoin world since 2011, and I'm fully aware of the implications. I did try and take a pretty straightforward approach with the article, though.
That's why it's so great, because it'd be different if there was someone else, maybe a quote unquote normal journalist kind of running through it. You would expect all kind of the lapdog, whatever, but I can tell by the way that you write it that you're like, hey, this is what's going on. So anyway, I'm talking as I normally do, above or around the audience and the subject. So I need to get right into it. First off, so it's automatically an allegory. So you're sort of alluding back to Joseph Valachi and his role in the early 1960s and coming to prominence. Can you kind of get into who Joseph Valachi was and how he makes his way into the world that Satoshi Nakamoto created?
Yeah, so Joseph Valachi was a low-level mobster in the 50s and 60s. He made a name for himself by being a getaway driver for organized crime. Spent some time in jail, lost his job as the getaway driver for one particular crew, and kind of started branching out, got himself into some murder for hire work, never really escaped the lower echelon of organized crime, but because at the time it was so private, any access was potentially monumental. Before Joseph Valachi came out as the stool pigeon of all stool pigeons, he's described as the first mafia member, or at least the first member of the American mafia to give testimony against the mob. U.S. mafia structures were mythical, quite literally. There were rumors it didn't exist. The Italian-American community always believed it existed. High-ranking officials in the FBI thought the mafia might be a legend. So in spite of Joseph Valachi's rather low rank within the mafia, him speaking gave truly unprecedented insight into sort of trivial things like how the initiation ceremony to become a member of the mafia was conducted, to really, really, really important stuff like internal organizational structures, the concept of a military structure operating within the criminal world, names all over the place. When you look closely at the testimony that he gave, one of the more striking visuals is just what amounts to a family tree of the mafia, and who is doing what and where and who reports to who and how big their teams are. So when he started speaking, it really made real the mafia in the mind of the United States. He testified in front of Congress for days, and his work is widely attributed with helping us understand how the mafia works. But behind the scenes there, and there are various accounts of this, so I want to make sure that I'm properly citing sources and not over connecting dots here.
Sure.
But there are various accounts that within the U.S. government, he was encouraged to write a memoir, that he was encouraged to put down everything onto the page. Obviously, the Senate hearings, congressional hearings, generally speaking, are a limited time. And the powers that be supposedly thought that it was worth their time and his time to put everything onto the page.
But there's instantly, so when these guys are because as you so wonderfully and beautifully put out there were legends, and a lot of times people will squeal or rat or however you want to frame it, and they'll put stink on it, right? They'll embellish their roles, or they'll make it out to be more or less than it should be. And Valachi had a certain gravitas because the detail was so precise to the nub and down to, like you say, names and details and so on, that his papers, right, his writings could, if you put it into the wrong hands, it could kind of be like an owner's manual, almost a how-to, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. In fact, that concern ended up playing a role in these documents never being published. In spite of being encouraged by some accounts by members of the U.S. Treasury and even senior executives within the U.S. government, senior elected officials, I should say. The final account is, by some measures, more than 1,000 pages of
Wow.
a written memoir. And the story goes that those who read the papers became more concerned about the blueprint that it could lay out for how to commit crime. The papers were originally encouraged to be created as a way to encourage more leaks, as a way to sort of shine sunlight into the criminal world, and maybe give mobsters less of a sense of safety in the shadows. But once these papers were actually read, they became as much a concern about what it could mean for perhaps aspiring criminals that could learn from the way that these professionals were getting away with crime and do it themselves. There is, just really quick, I want to add, there is a second possible and likely explanation for why the Valachi papers were killed. There are conspiracy theories behind the second option as well, but the official public reason why the Valachi papers were killed was because some Italian American rights groups got involved and expressed concern that it would propagate the stereotype that all Italian Americans were in the mafia. And again, there are conspiracy theories galore about whether or not that was earnest, whether or not this organization was genuine in its concern about the perception of the Italian American community, or if it was just trumped up mouth speak to a deeper concern about the blueprint for crime. But nevertheless, there are the two sort of reasonings.
I laughed because it's so meta, right? So you get to what would be it's not a small concern if you know anything about to listeners about the Italian American experience. There were noted anarchists of the time.
Yeah.
There's the whole Prohibition era. It's overturning. There are connections to the Kennedy administration and obviously JFK's assassination potentially. There's all sorts of so it's a real worry. But then again, the very next question to ask is maybe they're using that to obfuscate. That's why I laughed. It's just you just can never get out of this thing. But it was a very real concern.
Yeah, and I think the documents were so powerful that they spawned an entire world of myth, and I think that we'll be working to separate that myth forever. The first witness in the testimony in which Valachi spoke in front of Congress was actually Robert Kennedy, who was then the Attorney General of the United States.
Right.
And his speech that he gave, marking the opening of the hearings, I should say the testimony, is still public. In fact, you can go to, I think it's the FBI's website, and the entire account of Kennedy's speech is publicly available. And it's a fabulous and it's an interesting read. And if you know some of the other conspiracy theories about the role that the mafia played and the might have played in the series of assassinations in the 60s, like it really does all have, it's so ripe for myth, legend, and conspiracy theorists. Super
timely. So we've got a Netflix movie that just came out called The Irishman, which is a fictitious account of unionism and the role that the mob supposedly played there as well. So around the same time, government agents or law enforcement is trying to curb their growing power. And I remember a statistic that was rattled out in the movie, which again is not a primary source, but so they were worth billions of dollars at that time. So no small concern.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to quote something a little more reputable, the same dollar amount was mentioned by Robert Kennedy in his speech.
That's where they get it from. Okay.
Yeah, where he called he called organized crime a business organization built on human suffering, funded by billions of dollars in crime.
It was sort of a shadow government, almost a parallel government as far as he was concerned.
Yeah, the funny thing is that even today, we find ourselves we as a society find ourselves more romanticizing the mafia, right? It's the alleged criminals and the convicted criminals who are committing these acts, who have the movies told about them, not the investigators, not the attorney general, not the U.S. government.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
And I think that that component, I think, sort of plays into some of the negative reaction that I've seen to the article, where there's historically been this connection between. I mean, you think of what we call privateers. What we called privateers, private capitalists, we now call pirates.
Sure.
The idea of a free market, a truly free market, has always blurred into the criminal underworld. And the same people who romanticize pirates and private capitalism of the 15 and 1600s are apt to romanticize this mafia world, this parallel economy, meeting demand and providing services of real value to some people who the powers that be have determined shouldn't be met.
You're exactly right. There's actually academic studies now that have come out. It's a whole area of economics where they're literal pirates. So not just so you're exactly right. So you're the interplay of tapping a private resource to get information about crime and its potential to inform the government, and then that weird dance they have to do between enforcing and sort of showing their hand as to what they know versus, literally giving a blueprint for how to commit crime or to how to better commit crime, I guess, by reverse engineering, has kind of reared its head again with the cryptocurrency industry and, the oftentimes hysteria surrounding it. But there's another stat in your wonderful article, Crypto's Valachi paper, which we're discussing now, in that just this year alone, we're up to, I don't have it in front of me, but more than $3.5 billion supposedly in
$3.7 billion in illicit activity according to Chainalysis numbers.
Whoa.
Which makes it the highest amount ever in a year period, even without the full 12 months having elapsed. Though the percentage of industry has decreased over the last 5 years, there's been a more recent increase in illicit activity on the cryptocurrency as a ratio in the last 2 years. Between 2017 and 2019, not only has the net dollar amount of cryptocurrency activity for illicit purposes increased to a record number, but the percentage has also started to increase again. So what we call the Crypto Valachi Papers kind of are released into that world.
And you talk about a project Participate, and can you go into a little bit about that? But what I'm sure you can't tell me exactly, but you actually get to see what amounts to these Crypto Valachi Papers, right?
Yeah, well, I was very mindful going into the story of the parties that had conceived of the project, had organized it, had executed it, and theoretically had the most to gain. Namely, this was conceived by senior level executives over at Tether with the support from Bitfinex. These are two companies that are owned by the same parent company that have many lawsuits against, I shouldn't say many, but have multiple lawsuits against them, alleging that they used their own technology and their own access to the markets to allegedly inflate prices and do all sorts of other nefarious activities. I didn't want to participate in whitewashing history that is yet to be written.
Right. They're right in the middle of the New York Attorney General's fight, right?
Exactly. Yeah. This is very much a live and ongoing case. These are very much live and ongoing cases. And the fact that this report could be used to give the appearance that people who had yet to be seen innocent or guilty in the eyes of the law were willing to play with the law. I just needed to make sure that I wasn't blindly participating in a marketing campaign. So
that is an incredible insight, because my first thought was, if I'm Tether, okay, I'm being cynical, right? So.
And you should.
If I'm Tether, right, I go, hey, look, I'm like OJ sitting down with Judith Regan. No. But if I were to have done it,
yes,
this is how, I would have done it. And so that was sort of my first thought. And I think you thread that needle very nicely. You don't shy away from it, but that's not the point of the story. The point of the story.
The funny thing is, that concern was how I got the papers.
Oh.
I was originally offered a press release. It was very obviously tied up in a nice, neat bow, and had some pretty apparent objectives with portraying all the participants as on the right side of the law. Though their objectives are as legitimate as anyone else's objectives, it's not my job right now to say, are they earnest or are they not? I couldn't write this report trusting that the reason why I didn't have a copy was because it was dangerous. I needed, I guess I should, that's probably worth pausing on there. Going back to the Valachi Papers and the fact that the 1,000-page document was never released to the public, and that one of the more likely explanations is that the contents were considered too dangerous. This is the same explanation that I was given by Project Participate, the group that was organized by the folks at Tether and Bitfinex, and ended up including leaders at Binance and even individual participants from Coinbase and Deutsche Bank. The reason that I was given was that I couldn't have these documents because if they fell into the wrong hands, they would be a blueprint for crime. And it made sense to me.
Sure.
And while I'm in the business of transparency, I also I'm not an extreme transparency guy. I think that there is such a reason occasionally for the concept of a national secret, and there are occasionally justifications for information not necessarily being to be in some people's hands. The dark web is filled with recipes for how to cook crystal meth and make nuclear bombs.
Right.
I'm not necessarily a huge advocate of that. So after much back and forth with the founders of Project Participate, they agreed to get me an unedited, complete copy of the report, whose full name is, I'm getting this here, the Indicators of Suspicion for Virtual Asset Service Providers. And I have a copy of that report unedited.
Wow.
We went through.
No, so just to put a pin in that real quick.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask at the beginning. Do you think the fact that the cachet of the Forbes name, that it is for all intents and purposes a mainstream business journal? I mean, obviously, I respect you greatly, and I'm sure others do as well. But does the Michael del Castillo play into it, or does the fact that, hey, look, we're not CoinSpice, right? We're not a bunch of cranky dudes.
Nothing against CoinSpice.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Well, I mean, there was a lot of there was personal relationship building. I've known these people for better or for worse for years. I also have a reputation. I've received so-called amber documents in the past. These amber documents are created not for public consumption, and frequently include information about how to commit crime.
Yeah.
And those documents that I have received were never used outside of the
Gotcha.
previously agreed terms.
So you've got a rep. You have a track record here, and so the first issue you have is, look, guys, I'm not gonna rewrite your press release. You need to show me the goods. And then the second issue is, okay, what am I going to convey to the public? Am I, and I don't mean to patronize you, but am I a useful idiot in pushing across this stuff? Am I just going to, it's always the danger in reporting, right? That you're kind of putting forward someone else's agenda.
Yeah, I think, there was some cost-benefit analysis being performed both by myself and by the folks at Project Participate. What is the risk of, I'm imagining that they were concerned, what is the risk of giving this document to somebody who could use it in ways that they might deem dangerous, compared to the benefits of having that person tell a more meaningful, more useful, broader reaching story. And then I was also performing my own cost benefit analysis. What is the cost of being involved, even in a tangential way, in communicating beneficent activities by companies that have been accused of some malicious activities.
Right.
And then what is the benefit that I could have of navigating that carefully and communicating that meaningful story to my audience?
I love the way you set it up in the article, because you describe the Joseph Valachi affair as there's more nitty gritty there too, as to how he approaches the government, and how they approach him through the Genovese family and so on. But essentially, it's the government putting the screws to Valachi, whereas here you have a nascent industry essentially laying itself bare, so it claims, in front of the government. He's going, no, we're part of the solution. So maybe that I'm trying not to be cynical.
No, I think there are important differences.
Right.
The headline "Crypto's Valachi Papers" I think is justified. I think the similarities are sufficient to warrant the comparison, but there are important differences, and I think some of the differences are a direct result of the weirdness that is blockchain. Of this pseudonymous technology, occasionally truly anonymous technology, enabling transactions between parties that don't know each other around the world, occasionally leaving breadcrumbs, and in some instances always leaving breadcrumbs. And so with this new technology that creates both a sense of anonymity, creates both a sense of pseudo-anonymity, creates a sense of transparency, like these very counterintuitive concepts that previously weren't possible without blockchain are now all of a sudden very real. And so we don't have to wait for Joseph Valachi to come talk about how he launders money or how he receives payment for a hit. We can take a look at transaction patterns and sort of reverse engineer trends and start to see how one way of doing something is similar of doing it in another instance, and from that series of repetitions start to create bigger picture descriptions of what this behavior looks like without even having the criminals involved. So I think that I was also very mindful of sort of making this comparison between this 50-year-old series of papers that were written by a mobster and this 2-month-old series of papers that were created by public company, or not publicly traded companies, but by the public sector.
Sure.
And making it very explicit that I am not implying that these people are committing crime at all. I'm not implying
that they're modern day Valachis, right?
Yeah, they're not actually modern day Valachis. It's just that blockchain technology itself enables a dynamic that wouldn't even been imaginable during Valachi's time.
Yeah, it is an unbelievable piece, and we haven't even really gotten into the actual meat of the papers, but just some back of the envelope kind of highlights here. What I'm struck by is the potential that this coordination between, and it is coordination between some of the bigger companies in the space and law enforcement, is that the potential to go after people who are politically thought of as not being very nice or favorable to the government. Again, this is the conspiratorial hat here. The what now we might consider a crime, but in the future we might not, a la some poor bastard buying weed off of the Pirate Bay, and that's a 10-year-old immutable transaction that can be traced back to him. Are there any worries that these guys are in cahoots and creating kind of regulatory capture? And I guess we sort of discussed this already, but
no, I mean, I think in cahoots is an interesting choice of words, because it's in cahoots almost implies like some sort of secret collaboration.
Right.
This is not secret, and the Project Participate members have made it very, very clear that it is a direct response to the FATF guidelines that were released earlier this year.
That's
that
my next
mandated
question, yeah.
by 2020. They needed to be able to share information with each other when funds were transferred from one entity to another, similar to how banks are. This is called the travel rule.
Right.
If the currency exists in one place and stays in one place, and never does anything, you're not necessarily going to find yourself being reported to anybody. But if you move that money from one exchange to another, those two exchanges are going to be expected to share information about what they know with each other. And the folks behind FATF, it's voluntary regulation, I think is what they call it.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have sort of government sanctioned teeth, but it has the ability to ostracize you from the global community in a way that amounts to a government enforcement. And so anybody that wants to be a part of the mainstream, anybody that wants to exist in the light of day, needs to abide by these. I think they call them recommendations. They're not regulations. They're certainly not laws. They're recommendations, but they're recommendations by people who control the global financial infrastructure and the way that value moves from one point to another. So Project Participate was created as a specific reaction to these FATF travel rule requirements that they will start to have to be accountable to next year. So yes, to answer your question, they are in cahoots with each other. They are sharing information with each other about how their customers are moving funds, and what those, even in some cases where those funds originally came from.
Right.
Did those funds approach a mixer? Did those funds not approach a mixer? Did those funds were they ever filtered through a privacy providing coin like Zcash, Monero, or Dash? Did these coins ever approach or come through a Bitcoin ATM? Were peer-to-peer exchanges involved? All of these kinds of questions are being answered by these the Project Participate members, and shared with each other, with the expressed and clear purpose of complying with the FATF travel rule. So
Go ahead.
those on the so-called, I'm choosing my words to be intentionally incendiary. Those who are on the quote right side of the law, end quote, are more than happy to share this information with each other, while those on the quote wrong side of the law see it as sort of an infringement on their privacy and their ability to conduct business without the concern of law enforcement and regulators. But as you well know, that right side of the law and wrong side of the law are very, very loaded terms.
Yeah, and that's that, and it kind of goes against at least the early. This is even hard to say now. The sort of the cypherpunk ethos that crypto arrives out of, that Bitcoin takes root and form and shape, and so that's that. I mean, there's so many implications here, but the work that you've done in just merely articulating what what this is, some of the major players involved, is super valuable, because we're now having a very big discussion on my side of the debate about the power of exchanges. And, we all love it when the price was running up in 2017 and we're all financial geniuses and, it's onboarding hundreds of thousands of people a day. And the stories better than anybody else. But now they're delisting projects they don't like. They're, in some cases, these exchanges they have very charismatic CEOs and founders who give you everything from diet advice to tattoos. And so we're seeing and they're pushing as early as, say, the Winklevoss twins going in and asking for something like a bit license early on in New York. So exchanges are taking on a ginormous role, and I think will really shape the crypto industry going forward. And your piece just really reinforces that for me. So just to kind of wrap it up here a little bit, because I promised half an hour and I've taken you way beyond that. When you sat down to read this document, what was the thing that maybe struck you the most about it, that sort of hit you the hardest?
Great question. I'm actually glad you asked it, because I think it's really important. It's a potential story that I'm interested in. Anybody who's listening to this, I think it's worth looking into. I'm not the kind of reporter that's going to hold an idea too close to the vest until I commit, because I think that the world at large could benefit by the kind of transparency that would result from a lot of people looking into this stuff. One of the most interesting things, it was a concept I'd never even heard before. I hope that doesn't betray too much ignorance. But the PEP acronym, PEP, a politically exposed person. These are politicians and others who are particularly susceptible to bribery and corruption, as we put it in the article. These politically exposed persons, they may not actually be malicious. They may be victims. They may have been blackmailed. I think, bribing a politician obviously puts the onus of responsibility on the politician, but like sometimes, a politically exposed person can be a victim as well. These can be elected officials people who want to undermine the democratic process, will hold information that they have on them that might be completely unrelated to politics as a way to influence their political decision making. They can be city, state level, they can be national level, they can be in any country, they can be a part of any party. We don't know who these politically exposed persons are that are mentioned explicitly in the report. And I will say they are not mentioned in the report. This is not something that I held back out of concern for not wanting to give criminals a blueprint to commit crime. It was not in the report. So this concept of a politically exposed person, having cryptocurrency used in some way to influence their decision-making process, their voting behavior, and that activity exhibits itself in an identifiable pattern that exists on a blockchain is fascinating to me, and I think potentially really, really important, because once you can identify the pattern on a blockchain that is a symbol for politically exposed persons being manipulated, then you can teach that pattern to an artificial intelligence. You can basically do a Google search on the blockchain, and you can start looking for that pattern of politically exposed persons all over any public blockchain. And I think that the potential value from a democratic perspective, from preventing corruption of our democratic processes, is really, really, really valuable. And I hope that it's not just the FBI and the U.S. Treasury and other regulators and government agencies around the world who are paying attention to that and who care about how politically exposed persons are being manipulated with cryptocurrency transactions. I hope that my readers and your listeners and the public at large are paying attention to that, because there's always been corruption. There's always been bribery and blackmail, and there's always been people looking to subvert the election process. But the fact that this group has identified a pattern by which this is happening that could theoretically be searchable, I think is potentially really, really important. Now, I think it's really important, just like maybe in closing, is just a quick reminder that Tor, the anonymity providing browser that basically powers the dark web, was created by the U.S. Navy. It was created by members of the U.S. Navy, I should say.
Yes, sir.
And it was created specifically because privacy of the good guys was deemed so important that it was worth the risk of giving privacy to everyone. And I think that, if you look closely at this report, if you look at the activities that are described, the concern that it could be a blueprint for crime is very much there. And the skeptics who think that it's a subversion of Bitcoin's first promise, I hope also are mindful of the potential good of something like this, and the potential that these patterns might also expose activities that undermine the very fabric of our democracy.
Wow, not light stuff at all. The great Michael del Castillo, DEL space CASTILLO, out at Forbes, staff writer. Mandatory reading. Whenever he puts something up, I go to it immediately. Mandatory stuff. He knows the background. He's in the space. As you've heard, a brilliant mind. Michael, how else can people find your work and follow you?
Thank you so much, Edward. I'm the staff writer at Forbes. Forbes actually has a crypto section, forbes.com/crypto-blockchain. We do cover cryptocurrency and non-cryptocurrency applications of blockchain. I like to say that it's companies that my mom and dad recognize getting into cryptocurrency and blockchain.
Yep.
You can also follow me personally on Twitter at Del Rayman, DELRAYMAN. And I'm a LinkedIn junkie as well, so follow me there. And I pretty much post everything that I write, as well as some of my favorites from around the industry.
Boom, and we'll have it. We'll have links to all of that in the show notes. Crypto's Valachi Papers. Read it. Sit back. Let the conspiracy waft over you, or take the high road and think like Michael does. Thanks so much again for coming on, man. We really, really appreciate it.
Edward, thank you for the time. Thank you for the read, and thank you for the thoughtful questions. Looking forward to staying in touch.